Try to imagine yourself in the mind of someone about 2,500 years ago, walking through woodland to a sacred grove or a temple such as Newgrange in Ireland or Lucius in Greece. To such a person, the wood and everything in it was alive. Everything was watching. Unseen spirits whispered in the movements of the trees. A breeze brushing against his cheek was the gesture of a god. If the buffeting of blots of air in the sky created lightning, this was an outbreak of cosmic will. And maybe he walked a little faster. Perhaps he sheltered in a cave. When ancient man ventured into a cave, he had a strange sense of being inside his own skull, cut off in his own private mental space. If he climbed to the top of a hill, he felt his consciousness race to the horizon in every direction, out towards the edges of the cosmos, and he felt at one with it. At night, he experienced the sky as the mind of the cosmos. When he walked along a woodland pathway, he would have had a strong sense of following his destiny. Today, many of us may wonder, how did I end up in this life that seems to have little or nothing to do with it? Such a thought would have been inconceivable to someone in the ancient world, where everyone was conscious of his or her place in the cosmos. Everything that happened to him, even the sight of a mote in a sunbeam, the sound of the flight of a bee, or the sight of a falling sparrow, was meant to happen. Everything spoke to him. Everything was a punishment, a reward, a warning, or a premonition. If he saw an owl, for example, this wasn't just a symbol of the goddess. This was Athena, part of her. A warning finger, perhaps, was protruding into the physical world and into his own consciousness. It's important to understand the particular way in which human beings have affinities with the physical world according to the ancients. They believed in a quite literal way that nothing inside us is without a correspondence in nature. Worms, for example, are the shape of intestines, and worms process matter as intestines do. The lungs that enable us to move freely through space with a bird-like freedom are the same shape as birds. The visible world is humanity turned inside out. Lung and bird are both expressions of the same cosmic spirit, but in different modes. In the view of the ancients, then, all biology is astrobiology. Today we know full well how the sun gives life and power to living things, drawing the plant out of the seed, coaxing it to unravel upwards. But the ancients also believed that the forces of the moon, by contrast, tend to flatten and widen plants. The complex, symmetric shapes of plants were believed to be caused by the patterns that the stars and planets make as they move across the sky. As a heavenly body takes a path that sees it curving back on itself like a shoelace, so that same shape is traced in the curling motion of a leaf as it grows, or a flower. For example, they saw Saturn, which traces a sharp pattern in the sky, forming the pine needles of conifers. Is it a coincidence that modern science shows that pine trees contain unusually large traces of lead, the metal believed by the ancients to be inwardly animated by the planet Saturn? In the ancient view, the shape of the human body was similarly affected by the patterns made in the sky by stars and planets. Science has coined the word biorhythms to describe the way relationship of the Earth with the Moon and the Sun, marked by the sequence of the seasons and day following night, is built biochemically deep into the function of every living being, for example, in sleep patterns. But beyond these more obvious rhythms, the ancients recognized how other, more mathematically complex rhythms that involve the outer reaches of the cosmos work their way into human life. Humans breathe, on average, 25,920 times per day, which is the number of years in a great platonic year, i.e. the number of years it takes the sun to complete a full cycle of the zodiac. The average or ideal human life, 72, also has the same number of days. This sense of interconnectedness was not just a matter of bodily interconnectedness. It extended to consciousness too. When our man on a walk saw a flock of birds turn as one in the sky, it seemed to him as if the flock were moved all together by one thought, and indeed he believed that this was the case. If the animals in the wood moved all together in a sudden, violent way, if they panicked, they had been moved by Pan. Our man knew that this was exactly what was happening, because he commonly experienced great spirits thinking through himself and through other people at the same time. He knew that when he reached the mystery school and his spiritual master introduced astonishing new thoughts to him and his fellow pupils, they would all be experiencing the very same thoughts, just as if the master were holding up physical objects for them all to see. In fact, he felt closer to people and sharing their thoughts than he ever did through mere physical proximity. Today, we tend to be very proprietorial about our thoughts. We want to take credit for originating them, and we like to think that our private mental space is inviolate, that no other consciousness can intrude on it. However, we don't need to dwell on these assumptions long to see that they don't always fit experience. If we are honest, we must admit we do not invariably construct our thoughts. It's not just that geniuses like Newton, Kepler, Leonardo, Edison, and Tesla talk of inspiration coming to them, as if in a dream, and sometimes literally in a dream. For all of us, it is the case that every day thoughts just come to us too. In common parlance, we say, "It strikes me that," and "It occurs to me that." If you're lucky, it may happen now and then that a perfectly phrased quip comes to you that sets the table aroar. Then, of course, you're happy to bask in the glory. But the unvarnished truth is that the quip probably just jumped up and out of your mouth before you had any time to consciously phrase it. The reality of everyday experience is that thoughts are quite routinely introduced into what we like to think of as our private mental space from somewhere else. The ancients understood this somewhere else as being someone else, the someone being a god, an angel, or a spirit. And an individual is not always prompted by the same god, angel, or spirit. While today we like to think of ourselves as each having one individual center of consciousness located inside the head, in the ancient world, each person experienced him or herself as having several different centers of consciousness originating outside the head. We saw earlier that gods, angels, and spirits were believed to be emanations from the great cosmic mind, thought beings in other worlds. What I'm asking you to consider now is that these great thought beings express themselves through people. If today we naturally think of people thinking, in ancient times they thought of thoughts people. Gods, angels, and spirits can bring about great changes in a nation's form. The focus of these changes will often be an individual. For example, Alexander the Great or Napoleon were vehicles for a great spirit, and for a while carried all before them in a remarkable way. No one could oppose them, and they succeeded in everything they did, until the spirit left them. Then quite suddenly, everything began to go wrong. We see the same process in the case of artists who become vehicles for the expression of a god or spirit for a certain period of their lives. Then they seem to find their voice and create masterpiece after masterpiece with a sure hand, sometimes transforming the consciousness of a whole generation, even changing the whole direction of cultures and history. But when the spirit leaves, an artist never again creates the same genius. Similarly, if a spirit leaves through an individual to create a work of art, the same great spirit may once again be present whenever that work of art is contemplated by others. One of his contemporaries said, "When Bach plays the organ, even God comes to Mass." Today, many Christians believe that God is present in the blood and wine at the climax of the Mass, albeit in a rather elusive way which centuries of theological debate have never quite managed to pin down. On the other hand, if you read liturgies that have survived from ancient Egypt, notably the Book of the Opening of the Mouth, or considered chronicles kept in the Temple of the Vestal Virgins in Rome that record the regular epiphanies or appearances of the gods, it is quite clear that in those days the god's presence was expected at the climax of religious ceremonies, and in a far more imposing way than in Christian services today. The people of the ancient world regularly experienced the god's presence as awe-inspiring. When a thought came to the man walking through the woods, he felt as if he had been brushed by the wing of an angel or by the robe of a god. He sensed a presence even if he could not always perceive it directly and in detail. But once inside the holy precinct, he could perceive not just the wind, not just the swirling waves of light and energy that made up the robe. In the midst of the light, he saw the angel or God itself. On these occasions, he would have believed that he really was perceiving a being from the spiritual realm. Today, we experience moments of illumination as interior events, while the ancients experienced them as impinging on them from outside. The man we have been following expected the thought being he saw to be visible to others, what today we would call a collective hallucination. We don't know how to go about having such an experience. We don't know how to go about meeting a disembodied spirit. We don't know who they are. Today, it often seems that we search and search for a genuine spiritual experience, but are seldom sure we've had one that genuinely deserves the name. In the ancient world, experience of spirits was so strong that to deny the existence of the spirit world would not have occurred to them. In fact, it would have been almost as difficult for people in the ancient world to deny the existence of spirit as it would for us to decide not to believe in the table, the book in front of us. Paucity of experience makes belief in disembodied spirits difficult today. In fact, the Church teaches that belief is admirable because it is difficult. The more your belief is out of proportion to the evidence, the better it seems. This teaching would have seemed absurd to people in the ancient world. If you believe in a mind before matter universe, if you believe that ideas are more real than objects, as the ancients did, collective hallucinations are, of course, much easier to accept than if you believe in a matter before mind universe, in which case they are almost impossible to explain. In this history, gods and spirits control the material world and exercise power over it. We will see, too, how sometimes disembodied beings break through unbidden. Sometimes whole communities are possessed by a convulsion of uncontrollable sexual savagery. This is why commerce with the spirits was always considered highly dangerous. In the ancient world, controlled communion with the gods and spirits was the preserve of the mystery school. Some guy named Robert Temple has demonstrated that ancient cultures such as the Chinese and the Egyptians had an understanding of the universe that was in some ways in advance of our own. For example, he has shown that the Egyptians, far from being primitive or backward in these matters, knew that Sirius is a 3-star system, something which modern science only discovered in 1995 when French astronomers using powerful radio telescopes detected the red dwarf, subsequently named Sirius C. One of the stupid beliefs we are fond of attributing to the ancients is that they worshipped the sun, as if they believed the physical object a sentient being. Robert Temple's commentary on key texts by Aristotle, Strabo, and others shows that the sun as a sort of lens through which the spiritual influence of God rayed from the spiritual into the earthly realm. Other gods rayed their influences through the other planets and constellations. As the positions of the heavenly bodies change, so the various patterns of influence with history, direction, and shape. Returning to the man walking through the ancient wood, we see now that he experienced the spirits behind the sun, the moon, and the other heavenly bodies as working on different parts of his mind and body. He felt his limbs move like flowing mercury, and he felt the spirit of Mars raging inside him in the fierce river of molten iron that was his blood. The state of his kidney was affected by the movement of Venus, a heart consciousness, which emanates from the sun, then enters our mental space via the heart. Or, to put it another way, the heart is the portal through which sun god enters our lives. Likewise, a kind of kidney consciousness beams into us from Venus, spreading out into our mind and body via the portal of our own kidney. The working together of these different centers of consciousness makes us variously loving, angry, melancholy, restless, brave, thoughtful, and so on, forming the unique thing that is human experience. Working through our different centers of consciousness in this way, the gods of the planets and constellations prepare us for the great experiences, the great tests that the cosmos means us to have. The deep structure of our lives is described by the movements of the heavenly bodies. I am moved to desire by Venus, and when Saturn returns, I am solely tested.